Hey, everybody. How you doing? Welcome to Codepunk Podcast, Episode 5. I'm Bill Ahern, and I'm with Michael Zool, as always. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing good.
Fantastic. Glad to hear it.
So I got a point for you, Bill, and I want to just let you know that self-driving cars will be programmed to kill you. That's actually the name of an article that I believe somebody wrote, and we're going to get back to that, but just keep that in mind that self-driving cars will be programmed to kill you. And we'll talk about the ethics of self-driving cars and that sort of idea a little later. But I know this is a topic you kind of sprung this on us a little late in the game, and I thought it was a pretty good one to run with, especially with a lot of the recent, not just innovations, but accidents and information kind of coming out there. So what kind of made you think of this as a topic you wanted to get into?
Well, it's in the last episode I mentioned how we are very much invested in our technology. And I think that when you're driving, you'll see people who are looking at their phones, or they're playing with it. They're playing with whatever their little dashboard is on their car, because cars have so many little widgets themselves. They're practically a computer now. And so I started to notice that people are really bad drivers. Now, there are just some really aggressive drivers, and I'm not talking about them, but I'm talking about the kind of drivers who people clearly just not paying attention. And there's tons of different reasons that they're not. So I know that I personally just don't want to drive because driving is boring. And anybody who travels long distances, not too many people, I would imagine, would sing the praises of a long drive, right? So that was sort of the genesis of the thought. Was I started saying to my wife, whenever people started driving poorly, and even people who are driving fast, right. They just want to get to where they want to get to because they don't want to be in the car anymore. And I started saying to Candace, my wife, people don't want to drive. She's like, oh, why is that guy driving like an idiot? I'm like, because he doesn't want to drive. He doesn't want to be in his car. And so I started thinking, like, I can't wait for when we actually have, commercial driverless cars, robot. I like to call them robot cars because that's really kind of what they are. They've got enough sensors and enough intelligence to make decisions, because when you think about it, driving a car is very serious, right? I mean, you can cause major, major damage. Since the beginning of the car, there have been serious human catastrophes, So that was sort of the genesis of the thought, was people don't want to drive because it's boring and it stinks and there's other things you'd rather be doing. And so that kind of led me into the driverless car thing, where it's going to be really great when we can, and of course you still have to devote some attention, but if you want to sit there and read the newspaper, because even before phones, before technology made everything a computer in everything, I remember, when I first started learning to drive, I saw a guy reading he had the newspaper spread out over the steering wheel. Right. And I'm sure he had his fingers underneath of it, just but he's reading the paper driving to work. And although some people get motion sickness while they're driving, while they're reading, while they're in a car, I'm able to read, but certainly I don't read when I'm driving. I don't even look at my phone. So it just seems to me that cars have been a great boon to civilization, allow us to move great distances in a short period of time. But other than the few guys who love to, tweak out their muscle cars and race, or just the pride of having you hear guys or girls be like, oh, I love to drive shift. I love a manual transition because, I like the control. I don't think I think that's a minority group of people. I think for the most part, people would just love to get in. If they had to travel, they would just get into a machine that will take them to where they want to go, and they can work or drink their coffee or whatever it is they want to do, other than having to have, what is it, 10 and 1, 10 and 2? What's the, I forget.
10 and 2 or 10 and 2.
Yeah, right. So you have your hands on a steering wheel, eyes on the road, which is how you should drive, because like I said, it's very serious, but that's, it's boring. It's boring. Come on. We hate driving.
Well, all right. So a couple of points, right? So one, people who say that they want a manual car because they enjoy the control. They think they drive better. They're full of shit. Excuse my language, but you're not out shifting an automatic ever. If you have a well-tuned automatic vehicle, where the engine and the transmission is tuned, that computer knows exactly at what point to shift that gear in order to give you the maximum performance for your vehicle. So you're not out shifting that. You're using a manual because you want to use a manual. You want to drive a car because you want to drive a car. I So the slight exception, right? Okay, so I commute pretty far for work. It takes me an hour to get there in the morning, an hour and 15 minutes to get home. It takes longer to get home because apparently nobody works an 8-hour day. Like they all leave after 7 hours, I'm assuming, because there's been times where I've come, I've gone to work. Before this, by the way, this was after we recently moved our building. We didn't move the building, but we moved from one building to another where there's parking closer. Before, it used to take an hour and 15 minutes for me to get to work in the morning and an hour and a half to get home. And that was with me walking 15 minutes from where the parking lot was to work. Because on the way home, if I left and got on the bus, which would take me to my car, it would actually take, although in the morning it would take 10 to 15 minutes on the bus to get from the parking lot to my place of work. On the way home, it would take a half an hour just to get from the building to the parking lot. So you doubled the time, and it was standing room only. Because, again, people suck. They only work 7-hour days.
Right.
Maybe even less than that. So I have a long commute, and I listen to podcasts, mostly listen to some music during that time, and I drive over a mountain, and it sucks. I hate driving in the dark because I can't see that well. In the dark. I hate driving in the rain. As I've gotten older, I've just hated it more and more. I do enjoy getting in my car on a spring day or a fall day where I can roll the windows down, have some music on, and take a drive somewhere. I live, out in the Shenandoah Valley. I could go up the mountain and ride on Skyline Drive, look at the fall foliage, or on a nice spring day, look at the flowers that are blooming. Nobody wants to drive in the winter. Nobody wants to drive in the hot summer. Your windows are up, so you're basically, in your little chilly little ice box in a vehicle. So I agree to a certain extent. I think that there's some people like to go for a ride. I mean, you might want to hop on your motorcycle and go for a bike ride because you enjoy that ride. Hop on a bicycle because you enjoy that ride. Hop on a skateboard. Just go for a walk because you enjoy going for a walk. To a certain extent, some people like to get in the car and drive because they want to go for a drive. But nobody wants to have to drive. And I think that's the difference. You have to drive to work, most people. Unless you live in a city. So, I have to drive to work. I have no other option. And it is a pain. And so that's a point to where, when we look at science fiction like Minority Report, the movie Minority Report, where, the cars were self-driving. I think even iRobot, the cars were self-driving. So a lot of futuristic views of society, vehicles do drive themselves within reason, and there is a manual override, but for the most part, all of the mundane tasks are already done by the vehicle. And it just seems like, I'm surprised we're not there yet. I know the technology, requires a little more work, but considering that we have bad road systems, high congestions, you think that somebody would have come up with a system by now in which the self-driving car would be a little more perfected.
Yeah, and I agree. I also will counter your point that there is certainly something to be said for going out for a drive, especially on a motorcycle, which I would posit is a different experience than driving. Of course it is because you're way more exposed, but I would also say that even if you want to go for a nice just drive for the sake of driving, I would be curious if a poll could be taken at some point in the future, and maybe it will happen, where people who don't have to drive but could still sit in the seat and experience it and look at the scenery as it goes by. Is it more or less as pleasurable to go for a drive, a pleasure cruise, and not have to worry about steering and worry about paying attention to the road, right? Like you have to get to where you have to get to. That's no fun because you have to. But if you want to, is it still as pleasurable if you don't have to worry about the actual driving aspect where you just sit and go for a ride?
Right, which I can kind of see that. I can kind of agree with that. The only real difference I see, not necessarily in that, but in the psychology of being behind the wheel versus being a passenger. And this has nothing to do with it. I think if you're looking to go for a drive because you like the experience, I think you'd be perfectly fine with being in a passenger side of it. But I will say that a couple of times that I've had to take extensive drives, 5, 6, 7 hours, it is much easier to be the person actually driving the vehicle than the person sitting in the passenger seat, unless you're asleep. If you're in the passenger seat, you're asleep, it's a great ride for you. But if you're the person sitting there in the passenger side and you don't have something to do necessarily, and obviously this harkens back to my childhood where smartphones weren't necessarily, all over the place. But if you didn't have something to keep you occupied, sitting there for that lengthy period of time pales in comparison to actually being the one in control of the vehicle. But to your point, I think you're absolutely right. I think if you get to a situation where you're a passenger in that, experiencing those views, it would probably be much more pleasurable than actually being the person behind the wheel.
Yeah, no, and I think you raise a good point too, because if really the act of driving wasn't that much fun, racing games wouldn't be a thing.
Very true.
So, I mean, I think there's certainly something to that too. And again, we'll have manual control. I just think that the idea of the utility of a car will be much better served. And I don't even really need to enumerate them, but I just kind of will. Just for the benefit of the context, which is, think of really the kind of safety component, right? Cars won't get impatient. It's at a red light. It won't try to blow a red light. I'm sure they'll have some sort of system, it says it just turned yellow or whatever it is. You know what I mean? It won't blow yellow lights. There are so many accidents in the corner by my house because people are making bad judgments because they think they're more in control than they really are, whereas a car won't gamble, or at least we don't think it will.
Right.
Because according to you, they're programmed to kill us. And I know what you're talking about, but it's still funny. But you know what? When you think about it, people make a calculation as to whether or not they think the risk that they're taking will – obviously, nobody takes a risk that says, well, the outcome is going to be worse, so I want to choose that option. They think they're making the better of two bad options,
right.
in any driving situation where something gets out of control. I just think that machines will do a significantly better job than human beings at not killing human beings.
Right, and I mean, beyond those safety mechanics, I mean, I think they've been working on self-driving cars or driverless cars, autonomous as opposed to like semi-autonomous, since about the 1950s. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. And I think it was in roughly around the 1980s that Carnegie Mellon University actually started to finally develop an actual autonomous car that could actually drive itself. And we've kind of, it's been something that's been experimented with on the academic side and on the technological side. And we've seen it in sci-fi, but we haven't really heard much of it until recently. And I think Google was the one that Google self-driving car, I think, really kind of brought it into the, into the popular culture. Science fiction brought it into popular culture, but Google, I think, made people start realizing that, hey, this is potentially a reality.
Right, into the commercial reality. Right,
and I mean, the technology behind it is rather simple, and I think was it the same guy who did the mapping system? I'm trying to remember off the top of my head.
Oh, the Google Maps?
Yeah, I probably got it all wrong, but basically, I think the same guy who developed the technology for Google's mapping system also developed the technology, or at least was part of the development of the technology for the self-driving car. And it uses, because initially the mapping system, of course, if you had a Google car that came into your neighborhood, it had a camera. I believe the camera was on top of the car, correct?
Yeah, they are. And it's one of those 360 deals.
Right. And so a self-driving car, Google's self-driving car, also had a camera at the top because it was using, I think it's called LiDAR technology as opposed to radar. Radar uses radio waves. LiDAR uses light emissions.
Yeah.
In order to see, it builds a programmatic topographical view of your surrounding area in order for the computer to make judgments based on where you are. And it's ugly. It's, you have this big thing sticking out the top of your car. It's rather ugly. You're not going to sell things like that, unless something's aesthetically pleasing. But more and more as the technology has developed, it's gotten better looking. I think we're even using different sensors now, as opposed to just the regular LiDAR sensors.
Yeah, the cars don't have the big bulbous cameras on top anymore.
Right. So you're getting to the point to where there is significant advancement in the technology, and it's now legal in many states. I think Virginia, it's legal to have an autonomous vehicle. I don't know about Pennsylvania, but there are several states throughout the United States in which it is legal to use an autonomous car right now. And of course, we've had some success stories, and we've had some not so success stories.
Yeah, recent one too.
Right. So Tesla recently won, but it was from what I gather, it sounds like it was the driver's fault, because even though you have an autonomous vehicle, you were supposed to be paying attention, and he was not paying attention. And so when the accident that occurred could have been completely avoidable had he been paying attention and then took control of the car manually, but instead he was doing what he wasn't supposed to do, and then, of course, the accident occurred.
Right. It was actually here in Pennsylvania, my state, and he apparently, I actually just kind of brought it up, but then I saw the video pop up on the screen. Like, well, I don't want that thing talking while we're trying to do a show. Right. He was not being responsible behind it. And the autopilot, if I understand it correctly, is not necessarily the driverless car component. That it's like a sort of midway between an actual driverless car technology and just sort of autopilot.
Right.
Well, it's called autopilot, but sort of like if you stick you could program the speed limit into a car, right? What's that called?
Cruise control. It's
cruise control.
totally.
So it's a little bit more like just better, like advanced cruise control. I don't believe that it's like driverless car technology. So,
right.
And he was treating it like that and was totally not paying attention. And had he been paying attention, he would have noticed that the car had veered off and directly into a giant semi. Which is what it hit. He just went head on with a giant tractor trailer, and that's what he hit. And so he wasn't paying attention. And I'll be honest with you, as much as I love technology, so much so that you and I do a show about it, I wouldn't be comfortable enough at this point. I would love to use it, but I would guarantee you I would be paying attention as if I were driving. I wouldn't be playing anything on my phone. I wouldn't be watching movies. I think he was watching a movie is what he was doing.
Right.
I wouldn't be doing that because I would just be too nervous. I know the technology is in a nascent stage. It's not really perfected yet. And, like I said a few minutes ago, driving is very important. Paying attention, being a good driver. And a lot of people aren't good drivers because they don't want to drive. He didn't want to drive. He wanted to be doing anything else other than being in that car. And the thing was, he forgot that he was still in a car that could cause fatalities, and unfortunately, that's what happened.
Right. So, if people don't want to drive, which for the most part, I think a lot of us don't. In fact, I would love to take trains everywhere. I like the idea of being on a train. I would jump into Hyperloop, not as an early adopter, just like I wouldn't be an early adopter to driverless cars.
Right.
But the Hyperloop is a thing that, if it worked successfully, I would certainly love that public transportation. I like to walk places. What about the economic impact? Obviously, Uber right now is kind of disrupting the taxi cab industry and the limousine industry. Driverless cars could potentially upend Uber's industry, especially if cab companies have a fleet of driverless cars that they just send out. Kind of swings things back in their favor. But you do end up with driverless cars. Right.
Uber's also working on driverless car technology.
That is true, right.
And so imagine a world where you're Uber, and this is going back to why I'm calling them robot cars. Because just imagine where you have a car, and let's just suspend certain aspects of disbelief, right? The first thing we suspend is the idea that the cars still need a driver in them. Because if an Uber comes pick you up, that means at some point between its last drop off and picking you up, it's by itself. There is no human sort of chaperone, right? So we're at that level of the technology where it's trusted enough. So imagine now you have a scenario where you've got some sort of car share. In Philly, we had Philly car share. I'm sure a lot of cities had different car share plans where you basically pay a monthly fee. You're part of you have a subscription basically to use a car whenever you wanted to use the car, and then your usage I never was part of the car share thing, but a lot of people were. But basically, so you have a car share. You don't have to own a car anymore, and it's probably going to be a lot cheaper. And now you just have a robot car to come pick you up whenever you ping them on your app, and then you're done. To me, that sounds so good for the ecology, just the environment, and that sounds so good for the personal budget. You know what I mean? There's so many good things about that. To me, it excites me. I'm certain that there's people who hate that idea. I understand that change is very scary, but to me, that seems brilliant.
Well, what were the rideshare companies that were out there recently?
Well, we have Philly Car Share, which got bought out by some car rental company. I can't remember the name of them. And then there's another one. I can't remember their name. There's two. Philly Car Share was pretty big around 2009 here in Philly, and they weren't. I had a friend who worked for them, and it wasn't run real well, and they were kind of operating at a loss all the time.
Right.
So like Budget Rentals or somebody bought them out, and then I'm trying to think of the name. It was another like.
There was another big one that was kind of the disruptive one that a lot of places were, again, cab companies were, getting on their case about it. I don't think it was Lyft.
No, because Lyft is just like an Uber.
Right. So and we're bad technology people for not remembering this.
Yeah, I can't remember. But it was another like car rental company who saw the writing on the wall and thought, you know what? Instead of just renting cars, let's just basically timeshare cars, which is what they are.
Right,
it's timeshare for cars,
and that's a fantastic idea, especially if you're in the city, because how often do you drive? You know, I mean, not a whole lot. I mean, I think there are some aspects of so like the trucking industry. I don't think for the most part has anything to fear, because although you've eliminated, well, first of all, it would greatly benefit the trucking industry. You have, because drivers nowadays have a cap on the number of hours they can drive in a day. But they often lie, in order to get around that, because they want to keep driving, which is clearly unsafe. But a lot of truck drivers, they're not paid, an incredible amount of money. And I remember an old boss of mine was telling me back from when he was a truck driver, and it may be different nowadays. When he was a truck driver, he was driving from Georgia to I think Montreal. And then back, he would pick up, peaches from Georgia, drive up to Montreal, drop them off there, pick something up to come back through New Jersey, visit his family, and head back down to Georgia. And what he said was that a lot of places, when he got to the docks to unload, this is probably back in the 80s. It was back in the early 80s, maybe late 70s, early 80s. And the people working the docks would actually started to expect payment. So you'd basically have to give them money in order for them to unload your truck first. Otherwise, you would be stuck there all day. They'd unload your truck last, and anytime you're not on the road, it's costing money.
Right.
So he got out of the trucking industry because of that. But there's a lot of those kind of shady dealings that are going on that aren't of any benefit to the driver, and certainly not the transportation company. Whether it's health reasons, whether it's your livelihood, or whether it's just shady people trying to take additional money off you. But the moment you have self-driving vehicles and self-driving rigs, you have an issue of potential theft. If you had a rig that you knew was on the road, that you knew was delivering goods, yet because it's driverless or it's robotic, there's nobody in it. Very easy to stage an accident or to try to rip that thing off, when it stopped to get its battery recharged, since it's running off of some Tesla battery. So you'll still end up having to have passengers, and it might be a greater benefit to former truck drivers who are now, truck managers or supervisors who stay in the vehicle, make sure the vehicle's tuned, make sure it's staying on path, make sure that the goods are still there, and maintain inventory. You now have somebody who doesn't have to focus on driving a truck and driving a vehicle and extending their hours beyond what they should be. Instead, you have somebody who can actually, get some work done, get some sleep, maybe spend some time with his family. And because everything's automated, you have that, value in technology. So I think truck drivers, for the most part, their job's kind of safe even when we do go to robotic vehicles, because you're still going to need somebody to manage that vehicle and make sure it stays safe and up to speed.
Right, especially when you're right. There's so many different components, especially when you're talking about commercial transport. You might want a person there physically for safety reasons and for, just to witness something or prevent something. Yeah, in that I think that there's going to be a real need for, human intervention or just human presence. And probably for the foreseeable future, like the scenario I described with the robot cars and Uber doing their thing, I have a hard time right now seeing, unless, of course, we have enough metrics and statistics, usage to see, okay, cars are definitely more safe than humans, and we can have cars going without humans present in the car. But I don't see that happening soon.
No.
It's still kind of a ways off. But it's something to look forward to.
Do you use your cruise control at all in your vehicle? I never use mine.
No.
So a lot of people don't use their cruise control. So when you have an autonomous vehicle, outside of the fact that you're paying for this added feature, will you use it or will you take control of the vehicle more? There's this shift between, I don't want to drive versus I want to be in control of my fate. And this kind of brings us back to what I mentioned at the very beginning, and that was self-driving cars will be programmed to kill you.
Right.
And so this was the title of an article, and I don't remember it off the top of my head. I'll grab it and put it in the show notes. But the idea behind this is that if you own a self-driving car, it is within that self-driving car program to kill you in certain scenarios. And if we think of a scenario where a car is coming around a turn and maybe there's 4 children in the road, and the car's choice is either to drive into the side of the mountain, which will kill you, drive over 4 children, which will kill them, or drive off of the mountain and kill you, you're going to die. And that's just simple programming. That's simple computer science. It's going to weigh the average. It's going to weigh the probability. It's going to see what's the value here. Well, there are 4 young lives versus this individual life, and it's going to kill you. And some people are up in arms about that. Some people are scared about that, saying, oh, well, I don't want to be in a vehicle that could kill me if it thought that there were other lives that were, at stake and it needed to save those. And I thought about that, and I'm like, this is a really interesting, ethical dilemma. How do you program to that if you're programming a self-driving car? How do you weigh those options? How do you determine what the best outcome is? And can you legitimately and ethically murder the driver of the vehicle, driver/passenger of the vehicle, if you take and that's more of a utilitarian thing, right? Greatest amount of good, if it means 4 people live and the driver dies, you as the programmer that into it. What's the ethical implications of that? And
right. It's like one of the oldest ethical questions of all time, right? Like, and I sacrifice the few for the safety of the many.
And I started to think about it more and more and more, and I started to say, what, this is to me, this is almost a non-issue. And why is it a non-issue? Well, why would you be up in arms about this thing killing you in a scenario like that? Because you're not the one in control. Right. So if you were behind, and it's an illusion of control is what it really is, an illusion of control in automobile accidents. Many of us think we're invincible. Many of us think, well, if I were in that situation, I could have avoided it. But that's just pride. I mean, that's our own pride kind of kicking into it. If you were in a situation where you were in a vehicle and you came around a turn and there were 4 children in the road, and you either needed to run over those children or you needed to run into the mountain or run off the road, you would naturally attempt to swerve and avoid those children. You would probably run into the mountain or off the road and kill yourself. Or you would accidentally run over those children, and then you wouldn't be able to live with yourself, and that might even be a worse scenario.
It would be. And I think realistically, people would, up until the very last nanosecond, try to do both. And by both, I mean save their own lives and save the lives of the children. And I bet you a great many people, maybe not a majority, but there are many people who would be like, well, I would, maybe not even consciously, but would rather they live than the children.
Right.
Which is an awful thought, but there are people who would do that, and they would try to find ways after the fact to justify it.
Well, it's funny because I don't know if they would, because, and I don't know what the if it's just our sympathy, but. I mean, how many times have you been in a vehicle and an animal has run out in the middle of the road and you've swerved either into what could be oncoming traffic if there was another car in there, or you swerved off the road into another direction, which could put you towards a television pole. And it's kind of interesting how we attempt to avoid an animal, whether it's a squirrel or a turtle or whatever could potentially run out in front of you, cat or a dog, even though it might be best in that scenario just to run the damn thing over and not potentially kill yourself by hitting a telephone pole. So I think our natural instinct is to swerve, and some of it I think is our own impulse, but I think some of it is also the way we've been trained as drivers to try to avoid accidents. We although they try to tell you hit something that gives, which clearly an animal running out in the middle of the road is something that'll give, you tend not to do that because you're trying to not cause harm, whether it's to yourself or to others. And so I don't know if, there would be a percentage that would just say, to hell with it, and they would run the kids over because, we have those kind of people in the world.
Right.
I think the you're right though. I think some would try to do both, and in doing both, they might actually, hit one or two of the kids and also go off the road. So we might not actually make the best choice in that scenario at all. But it's all this illusion of control thing. And again, you brought up, people who want to drive manual vehicles. Well, they want to do it because they think they're in control, even though they probably aren't driving any better than the automatic.
Right. They may be driving worse. And the thing is, at what point in those split seconds do you acknowledge that you have to relinquish control, and that you have to be like, the best case scenario is that I go off the cliff, or I try to hit the mountain and still possibly do a lot of damage myself. Like, there's a lot of decision making, and there's a lot of personal bias in that decision making that can also cause people to hesitate, who maybe at too late of a time tried to make the right choice, avoid the kids, and they couldn't. Because they were so emotionally bound up, and they just couldn't make the right choice, and then it was too late. Whereas, and the headline is great, right? Like any sort of headline that says your car is programmed to kill you, because it contextualizes it in a way, right, that sounds scary, but the play on words is that the car will kill you before it would kill 4 people. Right? But here's an interesting thing. What if the car is full? It's got, say, 4 people in it, and there's 1 person on the road. Does the car make the calculation that it's the only option is to swerve the car into some ditch that could possibly kill 4 people in the car, or run the 1 person over?
If only we knew a couple of computer scientists who could answer that question for us.
I mean, that's a kind of conundrum. I still think that the car would. I think the cars really are programmed. I don't think it's a numbers game for the car. I think it's really protecting what's external to the car and what's internal to the car, and that's kind of where it makes the calculation. I don't really think it's going by numbers. Right,
and I think it's extremely interesting because this is now a cross section between computer science and ethics. And we, as computer scientists, I mean, we've had to deal with, HIPAA and FERPA, compliancy, PCI compliancy as far as data goes.
Yeah.
But we've never
even
really
credit cards and how to encrypt security, social security numbers and stuff.
Right. So there are some ethical areas that we have to pay attention to, but by and large, we haven't had to explicitly examine how this technology is, affecting, people. Is it doing it ethically or unethically? I mean, we can look at, again, we talked about, internet addiction, so we can look at the ethics of that. We can look at the ethics of, artificial intelligence and, whether or not we should go in that direction. But we've fast approached a point in technology to where it has become so entrenched in our lives that now we're talking about, self-driving cars and what the algorithm would look like if such an accident would occur. At what point, how do you save the most amount of people? What's the quality of life? What is the weight that you put to the variables that are in this particular equation? And it's not just a mathematics game anymore. It's a mathematics game plus, and a philosophical game, which to me is just completely fascinating, being somebody who's kind of, been on both sides of both technology and philosophy.
Right. Yeah, it is interesting. And it's going to be really, I think, on one hand, interesting, but then on the other hand, gratifying to see how we solve it, because we're going to solve it. I mean, It's not like we're going to go, oh, well, we can't figure it out, so we give up, right? Like, guys like Elon Musk, whoever the CEO of, like, Uber is and Google, they're invested. They're going to do it, and they're going to figure it out because they've got very smart people on it. So it's going to be really cool to see the decisions that they make. And, of course, as we prepare for this kind of future, we have to be ready for the backlash. Anytime a mistake happens, and they will happen, people are going to be like, well, see, here you go. This is why we need to stop. Because there are the people who think that you can somehow roll back the dial on technology and put the genie back in the bottle, and you can't.
Well, and if Elon is listening, which I doubt very much he is, ejection seat with a parachute as you push the car off the cliff. So there you go. I've just solved
problem solved.
Your ethical dilemma right there. As long as you don't get stuck in a tree, we've now saved everybody in that scenario.
Yeah, fantastic. Sky bags.
No, you're absolutely right. There are people who are waiting for one mistake and that's all they want is one mistake in order to try to tear down, everything that's been built. You're no longer allowed, especially in today's 24/7 news cycle, where they misread scientific discoveries on the news just to get, better headlines. I mean, look at even something like climate change, not to get into, climate change is real. Screw you if you don't believe so. Anybody listening, if you don't believe in climate change, delete our podcast from your podcast roll, because we don't need that.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Come on.
But I mean, in situations like that, it's like one small paper, like, oh, look, the Arctic ice grew 3 inches last year, therefore climate change isn't real. It's like, oh, okay, it's almost the exact same scenario. We're making these advances in technology to create something as great as driverless cars. That is complex. We just talked about a philosophical issue of potentially killing the driver. And there are people who are like thinking about just that thing all day, probably for the last 3 years as they're trying to put this together. And it's their entire life's work, and the technology is slowly evolving on the edge of advanced robotics and advanced artificial intelligence. And,
right, like neuroscientists working with artificial intelligent engineers. These people aren't taking this lightly.
So you have some armchair guy who's sitting there who's never wrote a line of code in his life. He's just, flipping through things on his Facebook page, and he says, "Oh, there you go.
Right.
We shouldn't be doing this at all." These people,
you're all idiots because some meme told me so. Like, come on, dude.
Right? I mean, if it's not in pictures, it's not worth reading, right?
True, man. And I do want to add, by the way, that Enterprise bought Philly Car Share. It's just Enterprise Car Share because it's not just local to Philly. And the other alternative to that was Zipcar. So those are the two sort of car share services. Zipcar, I think, is predominated in Philly. I just wanted to add that because we brought it up and it was bugging me. I was trying to remember. And I did just read an article today about how we have now, scientists have concluded their study that we have entered into an era where weather is not what it was 20 years ago. It is certifiably and irrevocably, that's very important, irrevocably hotter.
Right.
And it may keep getting hotter. And some people might want to attribute it to, or it's just the natural cycle of the Earth, or it might be that everybody has to have their giant gas-sucking SUV, and we're pumping all this, and we're choking, right, our ability to breathe. And so, and of course, we're trapping all the heat, all that stuff. I mean, I'm not going to go down that road. We know what's causing it, right? So just imagine now you've got these emissionless and also, much more quiet vehicles that are much safer for the environment. To me, that just seems like a win-win. I'm very excited for it to get here. I can't wait.
They did say, beyond just the driverless and the autonomous aspects of it, they said that one of the biggest wastes is people driving in, whether it's SUVs or whether it's even just a 6-cylinder vehicle. And that's why they built commuter lanes, for the very fact that they're trying to encourage more people to ride together in a car. Because one of the biggest wastes is that you have this giant car and there's one passenger in it, and that's very hard on the environment. And people have come up with designs for single passenger vehicles, and they've never really taken off because people think they're ugly, or they're like, oh, what if I have to haul a bunch of stuff, or I have my family. But if you have one vehicle in your family that's specifically meant to be the family vehicle, and then you have another vehicle because, you have to drive, half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour to work, and that vehicle is a single passenger vehicle, it's much better for the environment. And I think that robotics, and I think that driverless cars, but I also think that to a certain extent, the 3D printing revolution, additive manufacturing, and just the ability to kind of meet that long tail of self-manufacturing, I think we'll get to the point to where we will have a variety of shapes and sizes of vehicles. And so you'll start to see a lot of those small, we see smart cars now, we see weird bicycle things. So I think we'll start to see single passenger vehicles. And
I think that's actually, I hadn't even thought about that component. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah. So once you get to that point, and then you have the technology has evolved to make it autonomous, I think you'll get a lot closer. Maybe not Minority Report and iRobot close as far as, completely autonomous and no chance of an accident. But I think you'll get to a point that's much, much more comfortable. And that'll kind of add to the ability to be a little more mindful and a little more relaxed instead of stressing out on the ride to work, then stressing out at work, then stressing out on the ride home and taking it out on your family or whatever people do these days.
Yeah, so my mind is reeling, right? So now imagine you've got open source car templates and open source software AI to put in there. How do you envision? Right, so just imagine that packaged with everything. So you've got like you can take your 3D printer, you can print out all your components, and it's maybe you pay some, I don't know, maybe a car company, no, just imagine it's open source. Right. So you've got your template, and then you've got your software, and that's open source. And then maybe you have to buy your batteries from Tesla perhaps or something, but because I can't imagine you could print that out on a 3D printer.
And Tesla open source their plans, or at least Tesla's vehicle plans and how they use their batteries and their sensors, I think, are open. I don't know if they're open source, but you can view them. They don't sue for patent. They actually
they did something like that with open. I remember Elon Musk talking about kind of keeping that open.
So you have that.
So how would companies then monetize this sort of like new revolution of smart cars?
There would have to be some sort of you'd be paying for the battery parts, you'd be paying for the plastics to mold your vehicle, maintenance on your 3D printing machine, or on your batteries. No, we're fast approaching a time to where you're going to be able to DIY just about anything if you really, really wanted to, and right. Unless they throw some advertisements in with your Thingiverse download of your CAD files for your vehicle, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how things get monetized in the future. But it's going to be even more interesting to see how driverless cars evolve and whether or not we'll ever actually get behind the wheel of one or get into the passenger seat of one and say, yeah, go ahead, take me there, whatever.
Yeah, I think that we will. I mean, I certainly think it's not unreasonable to expect it in our lifetime at all. I'm just curious to see how it evolves, and I'm excited for it. I'm also patient for it because, in the meantime, I've got a motorcycle I can ride.
So would you get on a self-driving motorcycle?
You know what? I'll tell you what. I would not. I would not.
We'll save that for another episode, I guess.